Okay. Hi, my name is Emma.
And I'm Julie Seidel, and we're here at the Santa Cruz Mission State Historic Park. And here at the park, we talk about daily life at the mission. How do we know about daily life in the mission? Well, it's history, so there's a lot of documents and reports that we look at, but that sometimes gives us just one side of the story. Today, we're going to be talking about the work that archaeologists do and the work that volunteer archaeologists do, and talk about how artifacts sometimes reveal the hidden stories of the mission and daily life here. So in front of me, we have some artifacts. Before I touch them, I'm going to put my gloves on so that in case there's residues on the artifacts that can give us information or very small bits, we're going to keep those safe, and we're going to keep the oils from my hands off of those artifacts. And then in our bag of artifacts, we're going to take them out and see what we have here. Not. All right. So we're going to carefully take our artifacts out. And we've got a tray full of all different types of items. And when we collect the items, then we keep them together in the same provenience or the same spot at the same level. A lot of times people hear about archaeology and they're thinking about Indiana Jones and they're thinking about digging. And excavation is an important part of archaeology, but sometimes the real analysis of the objects is where we get all of our information. So this is important too, and the first thing we do is a sort. So right now I'm sorting the artifacts on our tray into different types of materials. And this is a fun task, and it gives us an opportunity to really get a visual of all the different types of materials that were part of mission life. So I've got a place with ceramics. I've got some lithic artifacts, some stone and rock materials over here. I have some big rough clay tiles. I have glass. I have some glass beads in here. That's pretty fancy stuff. And I have shells from animals, and I even have some metal objects right here. So the sort doesn't take very long with artifacts this size. But it's a fun way to get a view of everything. All right. And then the next part is further analysis. All right. So when we look at our artifacts and start to dig in a little bit deeper, then we start to get some of the stories. But just looking at the broad view of the artifacts can tell us about material culture and the materials that people used. And then we also have, when we do this bag after bag after bag, we have a sense of quantity. So we can see how much of different types of artifacts there are. And that tells us a story as well. For example, we have bone over here, and we might just analyze the bone and find out that there's cows that are part of the foodways, and there are wild animals that are part of the foodways. And then looking a bit closer, we can even get more information, because we can look at the way that bone was cut. Was it cut with a knife blade? and that tells us about tools that people are using and the way things are being butchered. Are they being butchered? Are the bones being opened up and fractured so that the marrow can be exposed? Because that's part of the foodways of the Native people, and so that tells us that they're still eating marrow, that they're still practicing that part of their culture within the context of the mission. So bones tell us what people are eating, and they're telling us how people eat. We can also look at the other major groupings we have here. We have some big, rough ceramics and things over here, and these are tiles. So the famous red tiles of the mission roofs are here, and depending on the context we find them, we also have noticed that these same tiles were sometimes used to make canals and zanjas, irrigation ways and waterways. So we can learn about mission life through where we find artifacts. We're seeing lots of shells here, and these are shells that come from the ocean waters right in the Pacific, right around us. But they also remind us that something like abalone was a really important food for Ohlone people even before the mission, and they're still eating quite a bit of it. That's where quantity comes in. We can find that they're eating quite a bit of it during the mission era, and so their old foodways still pertain to the culture within the mission. And I'm looking at some other shells here that tell a very cool story as well. These are Olivella shells, and they're very small. They weren't food for Ohlone people, but they were the shells that shell beads were made out of very often. And these shell beads were jewelry, but they were also currency. And this Olivella shell is the normal color, so it's interesting to find that in the artifacts of the mission. And this Olivella shell is white, and it's white because it was burned, and it was burned to turn it white because if it was currency, it all had to be homogeneous. It all had to be the same, so it would have the same value. So we're seeing that this is a part of currency manufacturing. It's still going on. There's still a trade network going on during the mission era. I have a couple of pieces of iron here, and there's a few nails being used during the mission era. Even though there's a forge here, though, there's not a lot of raw ore that people are working with. So these are more rare, and we're finding that rawhide strips, cowhide, was a more popular, commonly used thing to hold pieces of furnishings or pieces of buildings together. And here I'm moving over towards the pottery, the ceramics, and a lot of what we're seeing here is whiteware, and that's pretty common and that's pretty normal, and it represents the everyday wear for Europeans of that time. But I'm also finding pieces of feathered edges, and I'm seeing pieces with colorful patterns. And these things are also found around the neophyte quarters, the Native people's housing area. And so it tells us that those folks, those families, are also using these ceramics during the mission era. So looking at all of these things together, we can see how people are using different items during the mission times, and we get a bit of insight into their daily life, their culture, and if we take it a little bit farther, we can start to think about their identity and how they saw themselves.